Yep.
Hi, everybody. It's Steve Hargadon, and we're now well into our second day of the Global STEM Education Conference. So delighted with such terrific keynotes and sessions. Jeanne Century is here. Jeanne, welcome.
Thanks so much.
And thanks to our conference sponsors. This is the only real recognition they get. They're just such great organizations for allowing us to hold this event, put it on for free, and to be modest in their requirements of recognizing them. But please do thank them if you know anybody at any of these organizations. This is the chance now for you to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. You're looking for the star icon. Click on that twice, then click on the map. And give a shout out in the chat maybe, where specifically you are, the time, the temperature. Is it raining? Is it sunny? Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, maybe Italy, Malta. Anyway, wherever you're participating from, we're sure delighted that you are here. And if you're listening to the recording, thanks for taking the time to do so. Jeanne, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve, and welcome to everybody. This is so exciting for me to be speaking with folks all over the world, especially about this very important topic. So first, I am Jeanne Century, and I'm Director of Research and Evaluation at CEMSE, at Outlier, CEMSE University of Chicago. And Outlier is a research and evaluation group that focuses on empowering individuals who are seeking to advance education with knowledge and tools and expertise that they and that you need to realize change. So today I'm going to talk to you about a couple of our projects that we hope will do just that. Let's move on. All right, I see, yes, somebody likes my name there. Yeah, Jeanne Century, it is my given name. All right, so moving on, here's the topic of the day, right? Is it STEM or is it just good practice? Let me back up here. I'm just checking the chat. So I'm presenting from Chicago, so sorry. I'm in Chicago now. And I'll mention, too, that as I go through my talk, please just feel free to enter questions into the chat box, you know, just like raising your hand. I'll do my best to pay attention, and maybe Steve can, you know, call my attention to it as well. I'm very informal here, and, you know, we want to make this as useful to you as possible. So here we are, right? So is it STEM or is it just good practice? So right now these seem to be two different sides of a fence. So for all of you all over the world, I want you to take a moment yourself and pause and think for yourself about what you think STEM is. And even write it down, like make a commitment, define it. Nobody's going to be looking at it except you. So think about what STEM is for you, like how would you define it? And then we'll come back to this and we'll see what side of the fence you land on. So, as you all know, I expect STEM is everywhere. It's STEM this and STEM that. It's like all STEM all the time. And there's a lot of confusion. There's not very much time for thinking. There's not very much time, or so it seems, for dialogue. So there's a problem here. And what we're doing in our work here is trying to clear up some of that confusion, to make some space for conversation, to make some space for collaboration, and get some clarity, right? So these are all images of STEM schools here, all images that come from STEM schools. But the question is here, so what is a STEM school? What is it after all? What does it mean? So first, I'm going to address why it's even important to answer that question, because you could say, why not let everybody just define it for themselves and go about and do what they can, right? So we don't disagree with that, actually, about letting people define it for themselves, but that gets in the way of us being able to do something very important, which is talk to each other about what we're doing. So we're researchers here at Outlier, and one of the things we do is address one of the questions that we in education are always asking, which is, does it work? Right? We want to know if what we're doing is working. But in order for us to be able to answer that question, we have to be able to answer the question of what it is. Right? So before we can say, does it work, we have to answer the question, what is the it? So, right, we have to have this opportunity to have our common language. So one of the things that we do in education that's not very good, it's kind of our, it is one of our downfalls, I suppose you could say, is that we're not very good at talking to each other. This isn't common only among STEM educators, but it pertains to all different elements of what we do when we talk about inquiry, for example, or STEM, whatever it may be. And we need to get better at working together. It's not missed on many of you who may be teachers yourselves that we're often asking kids to figure out how to work together, and we're asking kids to communicate with one another in their learning. And this is a mirror that we need to turn on ourselves and get better at ourselves. Because the only way we're going to make progress together and be able to capitalize on everything that technology is enabling us to do, that being talk with one another all over the world, the only way we're going to be able to capitalize on that is if we develop some common language and figure out how to talk to each other. Okay, so we're researchers here at Outlier, but we also have a very, very deep commitment to working closely with practitioners and our leader colleagues in schools, administrators, to do work that's going to be meaningful and applicable. And we're also very committed to sharing all of our research work in progress. So I'm going to give you an example of that in a little while, because we believe there's no time to be wasted, right? The time is now. And we're interested in doing this in any way we can. All right, so let me just mention, I'm not going to talk about the studies we're doing now at the moment. We can talk about those some other time. Someone asked if we're interested in international. For sure, there's STEM schools and STEM, right, as you all know, it seems to be the thing of the moment. They're popping up everywhere. And there's so much that we can learn from one another, and it really doesn't matter where we're learning and where we're trying to build the STEM schools, as long as we understand that context and conditions affect how we implement what we do, and that's true within a country or between countries, regardless. So in any event, we have two studies that are funded by the National Science Foundation, and one started just 2.5 or 3 years ago, and one's only recently started. And the numbers here you see on the map are indicating the number of schools that we're studying in those states. You can see it's still relatively low, relatively small, but it's well over 20 schools in 7 states that we're looking at. And I'm going to tell you about the first study. So in the first study, one of our fundamental questions was, what is a STEM school anyway? And even though sometimes people may set out to answer that question by looking at theory and looking at perhaps what's been written in the past, we decided that the people best equipped to answer this question are the people who are in STEM schools right now, people who are creating STEM schools, who are living STEM schools, even if maybe they themselves aren't quite sure how to describe the STEM schools that they're in. So we went exploring, and we asked individuals in those schools, those who had created the schools, teachers in the schools, to tell us what a STEM school is. And we looked for a comprehensive list, and boy, right, that's what we got. We got a long, long list. And it was all over the place, all different kinds of things. But you'll see among them, you can see they were wide-ranging, right, from service learning, characteristics of the staff, expectations of students, right? We wanted students to demonstrate autonomy or have partners provide money, all of these things, and they were all over the board. So one of the things we do as researchers is we try to make sense of all of this. We like to group things together and we study them, partially so we can understand them better and partially so we can help others communicate more clearly about them and in a more manageable way. So one of the things we began to notice about these elements was that, in fact, some of them do cluster together. So you might see that students participating in career readiness or partner supporting instruction, skills related to the workplace, we see these conceptually and actually empirically in our measures that they come together to describe a certain characteristic of STEM schools that's focused on career readiness and skills in the workplace. So this is some of the work that we've been doing. And you may, if you're glancing at some of the words in there, you may have noticed, as we did, that quite a few of these are pedagogical. And they don't really say very much about STEM in the most basic sense, meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. So that was very interesting to us. And what we found so far is that quite a few of those characteristics that are common across all of the STEM schools that we're working with is that they seem to focus on these four things, or they seem to have elements of these four things. Problem-based learning, and that itself has a range of definitions. That's one of the things we're not so good at. So this can mean project, people call it project-based learning or projects or whatever it may be. But generally speaking, this has to do with solving either a real-world problem or a challenge and applying knowledge to the solving of the problem. We have personalization of instruction, and this pertains to being able to differentiate student learning according to their social and emotional needs, according to their context, according to their lives, so that their learning is applicable to their lives. There's also this issue of community culture and a sense that the school itself is a community and a family, a sense of family in the school. And then something I already mentioned, this future of life skills and a work orientation. And so far, these are four things that seem to be emerging as common across these four schools. And of course, there's nothing in there about science, technology, engineering, math in these, except what's implicitly embedded in them. So this was very interesting to us and a little bit confusing to us and a little bit befuddling and disturbing, in fact, to people who are focused on an agenda that, let's say, may be furthering the development of scientists, for example. So we began to look at this a little more deeply. One of the things we've done is look at the vision and mission statements of the schools. And that's been interesting too. And we looked at, so these statements are selected from the vision statements of 20 of the schools, and they're pretty representative. They're not particularly cherry-picked in a particular way. And you can see that they focus on real-world applications. They focus on critical thinking skills, problem solving, and on their students becoming members of a learning community and active citizens in society. And this was quite common, and you can see that these characteristics are reflected in those four characteristics I just talked about. So, so we thought, okay, well, I don't see a lot of science, technology, engineering, math explicitly stated here, so let's go looking for that explicitly. So then we looked for STEM explicitly. So again, these are parts of their statements that actually did talk about STEM explicitly, or at least you could say science, technology, engineering, or math. But even then, they talked about them in the STEM disciplines became a context. So they would say it was where it's vitally important, or a focus on, or a strong emphasis on, or aligned and focused toward. So even then, it seemed like STEM was serving to be more of a lens for schools. So that brought us, again, so we're back to the initial question. Is it STEM or is it just good practice? So one of the things that's interesting also about the schools we've been looking at that call themselves STEM schools or that identify with these characteristics is that those of you who are educators know already that these aren't new ideas, that the schools are implementing. Problem-based learning or project-based learning has been around for a long time. And focus on work skills or life skills has been around for a long time. What is interesting about these schools that feels a little different and that seems a little different is that they're bringing them all together in one place. They are drawing all of these good ideas and implementing them all together under this umbrella of a STEM school. And not only that, but they're actually quite intentionally, they're actually implementing them. So they're not just saying they're implementing them, they're actually doing this, and they're working hard, you know, to pioneer these things. And they're seeing how it's going. So as I was reflecting on this, I thought, oh, real-world applications and working on problems and projects. It brought me back to my graduate education, which was some time ago, and I began to reflect on John Dewey. And I thought, is this STEM or is this John Dewey? Because we know that John Dewey talked about giving students projects to look at, projects to learn, things to do, right? Active learning, things to do. And he talks about education being real life, like that is education, and it's not something you're doing to prepare for something in the future. And he talks about problems and how we learn when we're confronted with problems. So again, you know, this brought us to say, is it STEM? Is it John Dewey? Is it good practice? What is this? And the answer is that there is no answer to is it STEM or is it good practice. The answer is it is STEM and it's good practice. And the goal for us as a community and for us as researchers, but us as a worldwide community of researchers, is to find a way to talk about these things so that we can understand what we're talking about and learn from each other. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about a tool that we've developed. I spoke about how outlier research and evaluation, that we're very committed to the creation of tools and processes that will help people take what we're learning and identifying in our research work and be able to apply it and learn from it. So we've done that. What we're working on doing is creating maybe what you could call a taxonomy scenario, right? So here at the top we have all STEM schools so far seem to have problem-based learning, this community culture. These are those four things, the personalized instruction, and they have a STEM lens. But then there are elements of these schools that some STEM schools have, in fact many schools have, but some don't. So some focus on higher education, some focus on careers only, some have internships, some do mastery, some have intersession. And the idea here is to be able to look at schools and what's similar about them, what's different about them, so that we can figure out better what's working for which populations, under which contexts and conditions. So in our research work, we have a very theoretically grounded framework that informs how we think about it. And it's our own research-based taxonomy, and any of you can get in touch with me, and I'm happy, very happy to share our publications with you that explain it. But it's not particularly user-friendly, and we recognized this, so we created a tool that is accessible immediately and user-friendly. And I'm going to ask you to go to this location. I'll tell you where to go at the end of our conversation here today. But we created an online environment that outlines what the STEM school components are, and organized by groups. So all of those long lists of components that, that we elicited from the schools we worked with, we organized into groups. And you can go there and read about it, and you can see pretty clearly what the groups are. The groups are things like their organizational structures, behaviors expected of the leadership, behaviors expected of the students, those sorts of things. And then you can click on any one of these components and you'll get a definition of what those components are. And then for some of these, like we call them problem-solving projects, that's like problem-based learning, you can then click on these examples and then it will take you to a link to a website. In this case, if you click on problem-solving projects, you can click on this link to High Tech High, and High Tech High has put together a video about what project-based learning isn't. Another thing that you can do when you go there, and I'll put the address up here for you now, is that you can go in and you can select all of the schools that are already included in this list, or you can deselect them all and look at the schools one at a time, or you can add yourself. You can put your own school in there as well, and we have a process set up that you can do that. So then you can begin to add to this list, and it becomes a tool that our whole worldwide community can use to see what we have in common, to see what examples we have to share with one another. So you can just go to researcherswithoutborders.org, and this is a website that we have in transition now to our new Outlier website, but it's there for you now, and you can look under data visualizations and go to the infographic. So here we are. Right? We're here with all of these examples, and ultimately our goal is to get this clarity. So now, take some time, go back to that definition of STEM that you wrote. Or if you didn't write them, really, how many of you actually wrote them? But if you did write it down, take a look at it. And if you didn't write it down, think about your impressions of what STEM is, and consider this whole range of elements that we've identified in the STEM schools that are operating now, and consider which elements of that you believe are part of your STEM school, if you're in a STEM school, or are part of your conception of what STEM is, which parts aren't part of your conception of what STEM is. And that will enable you to begin to talk to others with clear language about what STEM is. So when you leave this session, well, when you leave the session today, there's lots of other sessions you can go to, including one that will be immediately after this session at 11 o'clock Chicago time, focusing on some of the computer science education work we've been doing. But when you have a moment, go to the infographic and take a look around. And if you're in a STEM school, at your school. And if you're not in a STEM school, take a look and see what other STEM schools are the components they're using to define their schools. So like I said, we're Outlier at Outlier Research and Evaluation at the University of Chicago. I'm Jeanne. You can get in touch with me by email. You can look me up, call me, or you can reach out to my colleague Melanie LaForce, who is taking the lead on our STEM school projects. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions or for conversation. So please, I'll invite any of you to pose any questions you have. I saw a few pop up as I was talking. So please just pose any questions you might have to me or to others in the room.
Or you can raise your virtual hand. And Jeanne's given everybody microphone privileges, so if you'd like, you can even just grab the microphone by clicking on the talk button at the top left.
So I see one question here. Do you think a liberal arts school can also be a STEM school? So we've said, again, and we don't have the final word in what a STEM school is or what a STEM school isn't. So my personal answer, and the way that our group would answer that question, is that it depends on what you mean by a liberal arts school. It's been our experience, as I said, that STEM schools focus on these issues of preparing students for, in some cases, for college and career readiness. They focus on problem-based learning. They focus on integrating the disciplines into these kinds of problems. And they view what their school does through a science, technology, engineering, math, through that lens. You know, it depends on what you mean by liberal arts school. We have said that if the school really looks at everything through an arts lens, then it probably wouldn't, so far, I'll say, fit into our taxonomy of STEM schools, but that doesn't mean that a group of schools that views their work through humanities lens or an arts lens, or more broadly speaking, liberal arts lens, can't place themselves in the taxonomy. Our main point is that you articulate exactly what parts of what you're doing make you a STEM school, and what parts of what you're doing you think might be something that's unique or differentiates you from other STEM schools. Let me know if you want me to elaborate on that more. So I see that somebody asked what knowledge teachers need to have to be effective teachers at a STEM school. So of course this is an open question. I mean, I think that those of us who have been working with teachers for a long time, and those of you who are experienced teachers, could expect that the characteristics that teachers need to have to be great teachers really are the same no matter what kind of school you're in. But one thing that we found, and I'm not sure if you meant, when you were asking about knowledge, if you meant disciplinary knowledge exactly, but one of the things that we look at is we look at characteristics of teachers that might influence their ability to be in STEM schools, to be, you know, effective teachers in STEM schools. And this is in the context of STEM schools being what we would call innovations, right, that are relatively ill-defined at the moment. So that means that right, teachers are operating in a setting that's evolving. In many cases, the schools are very, very visible. They're scrutinized. So we found that the teachers who are in these settings, what those teachers tell us and what the school leaders tell us, teachers need to be like in order to do well in those settings, is that they need to be flexible, they need to be resilient, they need to be innovative themselves, right? So have a willingness to take on new and different things, be okay with ambiguity, be collaborative. So these kinds of characteristics that have to do with being innovative themselves are the kinds of teachers who do well in these schools that are ever evolving their models, that are ever examining which components of their schools seem to be the most important elements, and just as importantly, which elements of their schools do they feel like they're ready to give up. And often the giving up part of something that people have invested in is harder than the keeping part, right, of something that they've invested in. So it takes individuals who are reflective, who can look at the outcomes and make thoughtful, collaborative decisions. Now, with that said, depending on the nature of the school and the mission of the school, there may very well be some disciplinary content areas that the school leaders and teachers themselves feel they need to know to be effective STEM teachers. But these are the characteristics I just described to you are the kinds of characteristics that we are being told by the practitioners in the schools teachers need to have in order to be trailblazers in this way. Are there other questions? Let's see.
Hi, Jeannie. Thanks for your talk. It's been really good. It's Gary in Melbourne. I'm curious about the need to be innovative. I suspect it's overrated, and really what we need is effective executors. So people who can adopt a relatively new idea or an old idea and put a new spin on it and then deliver that in an effective manner. What does the research show?
Well, we do research, and I'm not exactly sure that this is what you're asking, but a lot of the research that we do here focuses on measuring implementation of innovations. And it's important for me to clarify, too, that we tend not to jump on the quote-unquote innovation bandwagon, meaning something doesn't have to be new to everybody, new to the world in order to be useful. And in fact, one of the things we found, as I mentioned earlier in the STEM schools, is that they're doing many things that have been around for decades. But what's different about them, and maybe this is what you're getting at, what's different about the STEM schools is that they're actually doing them instead of just saying they're doing them. But back to our work on measuring innovations, we define an innovation as something that's new to the user. It doesn't matter if it's new to the world. If it's new to the user, then the same factors that affect their use and their ability to implement it well come into play. And we study these things. We study, and we have ways of measuring the factors, right? The context and the conditions that enable an individual to execute an innovation well, effectively, as you would say. And one of the things that we found, and that we deeply believe, is that, well, I'll put it this way. One thing we know is that practitioners never implement a model, an intervention, an innovation, whatever you want to call it. They never implement an innovation exactly as it's intended. It never happens. I think sometimes people like to pretend it does, but it doesn't. So we acknowledge that. And we go a step further and acknowledge and actually believe that, that teachers who are well aware of the underlying principles behind the design of an innovation will make adaptations to that innovation. I'm just, again, using that word very broadly to mean any reform or program or intervention. When practitioners understand the principles underpinning that innovation, they'll make adaptations that are based on those principles, right? They'll make principled adaptations that are customized to meet the needs of their children in their context, in their community. Teachers, unfortunately, or school leaders, or district leaders, or in whatever organizational structure you're working, who don't understand those principles, make adaptations that may not be aligned with those principles, and in that case, may, in the world of studying implementation, they make what are called fatal adaptations, right? Adaptations that take away from the effectiveness of what's going on. So when it comes to implementing innovation, it's not just doing something new, and in fact, it's, in many cases, it's doing something for which there's actually some good evidence, is effective. Again, we have to be clear about what kinds of outcomes you're talking about, but it's about implementing it fully and implementing it with the kinds of adaptations that are going to best meet the needs and context of the learners, whether it's in school or after school or out of school setting, whether your learners are very young children or adults. It applies no matter what. When it comes to what's effective, you asked about research on that. The second study I referred to is examining the question of which components of STEM schools seem to be most closely related, right, correlated. It's not a causal study, it's not an experimental design, but which elements of the school seem most closely correlated to a range of student outcomes that we're looking for. And that includes persistence and interest and pursuit of, in the case of this particular study, STEM disciplines. So the answer to your question is an empirical one, of course, and one for which there's, well, in the context of STEM schools anyway, there's zero evidence. But we're trying to work on that. And so once the field can better understand what elements of a school seem most closely tied to the kinds of outcomes we're looking for, depending on who you are and the kinds of outcomes you want, then we can begin to then turn around and help practitioners focus on those elements with principled adaptations that will meet the needs and context of their students. So it was a very long and, I guess, multidimensional answer to your question, but I hope it was an answer.
Thanks, Jenny. Very useful.
Great. I see somebody commented, this is Alba, noted that it sounds as if educators and administrators need to be in an ongoing and thoughtful, self-assessing mindset. And we also, at Outlier here, we do a lot of work that looks at sustainability and I should say endurance, endurance of change, endurance of innovations, and what makes something last and not last. And one of the fundamental ideas we've extracted from that work is that, is that sustaining change is an oxymoron, really, especially when you look at long-term time horizons. And by that I mean when we implement an innovation, so often all of us do this, all of us in the world of education. So often we focus on thinking, let's keep it going. We just want to keep it going. Keep it going. And in our work, we refer to that as maintenance. Just keep it as designed, as explored, going. But what we also know is that in order for something to last, it must adapt. So now there's a lot of work and a lot of conversation we could have about how one implements things through various stages. But ultimately, an innovation must adapt in order to last. So in order to make thoughtful adaptations, as Alba was talking about, and in order to help an innovation last, we need to look around us and collect some evidence of any kind, There's a whole range of evidence that you can look at, and unfortunately too often, even though student outcome evidence is essential, evidence that can help us understand how to adapt an innovation so that it can endure also comes from understanding from teachers and school leaders and policy leaders about the reasons that they're taking actions that they're taking. And if there's reasons that a teacher, for example, is making a decision that seems counter to the principle of an innovation, it's important to understand why so that we can, what that reason is so that we can address it. So all to say, it's extremely important to have an ongoing improvement structure. That's how we talk about it. Ongoing improvement structure is an essential element to being able to sustain the work that you're doing. Let's see. I'm looking for another comment here, and moderators, help me out because I'm just scrolling through the comments. Let's see. Oh, yeah. How are curricula organized? I see somebody's asking in ineffective schools. Ineffective STEM schools. So right now, there is no knowledge base of what specific curricula STEM schools are using. And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by curricula, so you could mean instructional materials, which is what I just responded to. You could also mean the scope and sequence of the content, the concepts, and what's taught when and what's taught over time. So there's nothing known right now specifically about what's being used in STEM schools as a whole. But I can tell you that what we do know so far. So one of the things that we know so far is that some STEM schools have what they would call a core curriculum. So this is a set of core courses that students must take before they move on to electives. And this is not atypical, right, about high schools, and I'm talking about high schools here. But it's done in such a way that the school leaders understand that every student has a certain core of knowledge. And in some cases, schools commit to varying levels of mastery learning. Right, and so these are schools where they give students repeated opportunities to address their learning, to demonstrate their learning, and they also use innovative ways, I guess you could say, and by innovative, I'll just say non-traditional, right? So non-traditional ways to demonstrate their learning, and that's pretty much everything but a written test, right? So non-traditional ways to demonstrate their learning, to demonstrate that they've achieved mastery. So that's one element of the instructional program that we see in STEM schools. Another one is that, as I mentioned before, they're very focused on skills in workplace. So in those schools, they may be focused on having internships that are developed in partnerships with industry, or they also have partnerships with universities, higher education in their communities that enables them to focus on problem solving and problem-based learning. There's other kinds of STEM schools that are more health focused, and in some cases health and career focused. So their curricula, for example, may focus on a range of health careers for students. And again, depending on where the schools are and what the contexts are, the mission and goals of those schools differ. So, for example, one of our advisors runs a network of STEM schools in the state of Texas. And one of the things that she talks about is their commitment to ensuring that their students have a certification when they graduate from high school, and a certification that enables them to immediately step in to a career such, like a health career, a lab worker, or a sonogram technician or some such thing like that. But she's also very clear to articulate that this does not in any way suggest that they have limited expectations for their learners or lower expectations for their learners in any way at all. They have every expectation that they will fully prepare their students to go on to higher education should those students so choose. However, they recognize that many of their students have a very realistic and immediate need to be employed when they graduate from high school. So they enable them to do that, so then those students are able to then make a next step into higher education and other kinds of career training if they so choose. So there's a whole range of curricula, in answer to your question, that are developed depending on the mission of the school. And again, your question was, how are curricula organized in effective STEM schools? And I'll say that there is no clear body of knowledge about what so-called effective, quote-unquote, effective schools do, and that's very much what we're trying to develop. We're trying to develop the common language and communication with you as practitioners and other researchers so that we together can accumulate a body of knowledge that will help us answer your question. Let's see. So I see somebody's asking a question about elementary. Jenna. So Jenna's asking about elementary or primary schools for some of you, depending on what country you're in. And here in this country, there's it's a trend, right? It's the next new thing is the creation of elementary STEM schools. And and I'm just being honest with you here, right? Because we want to collaborate with you to get these questions answered. In as much as relatively little is known about how we're defining middle and middle schools and high schools, as we call them here in this country, even less is known about what it means to be an elementary STEM school. And to be honest with you, I mean, I have many decades of experience working with elementary schools in the areas of science and mathematics, and I believe it can be even much more challenging given the nature of elementary schools and who elementary school teachers are. So those of you who may be interested in STEM education at elementary level, please do get in touch with us, because this is an emerging priority for us here at Outlier. Let's see. Oh, well, I see Gary. Gary is saying that this, doing more at elementary primary must be a good thing, and we're strong advocates for that here. It seems to be a problem. I will call it a problem, the blinders to what's going on with young children and elementary. A lot of the focus is on high schools. That's been the case even as educators have sought to reform individual disciplines, mathematics education or science education. There has been a focus at a high school level or maybe at a middle level, but it clearly begs the question, how can we expect a 15-year-old learner to learn 15-year-old science when they haven't learned science from from when they were born through age 14? They can't. And what we do for the early years for students builds an enormously important and essential foundation. We can't just step into fifth-year piano playing without having year 1 through 4. It baffles me why some feel we can step into fifth-year STEM disciplines without having the foundation that's so important for our young learners. Looking for some more questions here. I'm just scrolling through your chat. So if you have a microphone, do feel free to jump in. So I see Christina has asked about STEM pathways. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by STEM pathways. So you could please chime in and give a little more explanation. But I do know that in my home state of Illinois, there's an effort to create what they're calling STEM pathways, and in other places as well. And by that, they're referring to career pathways. And the approach that they're taking there, actually, in my home state, is by creating opportunities for learning, whether it may be more traditional courses or more experiential kinds of learning opportunities, that a student can, that will enable a student to navigate their own pathway toward a career. And again, this is related to a general idea of more customized learning for students and more self-direction for learners who can begin to navigate their own ways among options. Of course, the challenge of that comes from some of the political and I guess I'll call them learning requirements, right? Learning requirements we have in ensuring that as students navigate their learning in their different directions, that they're sufficiently meeting the range of learning requirements. And those of you in other countries have different issues pertaining to that. You have different levels of centralization of your education system, very different, and in almost every case, I imagine, more centralized and more systematic guidance in your education system than we do here in the United States. So Jenna is chiming in again here saying yes, asking if there will be variation in the types of STEM programs and levels of proficiency, and that's absolutely right. There will be variation. What we're trying to do in our work and what we're trying to do by engaging STEM school practitioners and STEM educators is in trying to understand which elements of those programs are in fact common across all of them, because ultimately it's those common elements that comprise the core of what STEM means. And then you remember the slide I showed you with the taxonomy, and then be able to help schools self-identify which of those categories maybe they belong in. And then that enables us to learn more, right? As researchers, we can learn more, and then as practitioners, STEM educators can learn more from one another because they'll recognize that certain schools are much more like them than other schools are.
Hi, Jeanne. When you go out to schools, are you supplying information to schools, or are you asking information about schools? So are you surveying information from schools, or do you support and supply information back to schools to help them categorize or fill the gaps in their curriculum?
Yeah, we do both of those things. And that's very much a reflection of what I said earlier about how we do our work. We believe very much in building collaborative relationships with the schools who participate in our research. I can't, those of you who are researchers or who know researchers may know that it's very challenging to do research with schools, and to be honest, I don't know why a school would even bother to let a researcher in, because many times research is done and there's really no immediate benefit to the school, and sometimes there's ultimately no benefit at all to the educators. And so we're very committed to working with the teachers and the school leaders to find ways to give them back information that's going to be useful. So one of the things we do, I'll get very concrete. So one of the things we've done with the schools in our studies is we go through what we call a model articulation process. And right, so this is our conversation where we work through with the school, identifying exactly what are the components of their model, what are the parts of their model. And in many cases, we know, in some cases, those who are in a school have had the luxury of being able to do that. But we know in many cases, it's not the case. Practitioners in schools are always short of time, and often they haven't had a chance to stop and reflect and articulate clearly what exactly it is they're trying to do. So that benefits both our work and it benefits them. But then what we also do is we go and we can offer that to schools that are not part of our research. We go and we offer that as one of the kinds of services that we do with schools, help them articulate their model. Also, we offer the instruments that we develop and collect data with. So we'll articulate the model, and then we'll measure implementation of that model. We feed that information back to the school. We experiment a lot with data visualization and illustrating the data in ways that are going to be as useful to those practitioners as we possibly can. And in many cases, they want that information that they use, and school leaders may want that information to share with their community. In some cases, we've even gone and done community presentations on behalf of the school at their request. So anyway, I got off a little tangent there, but I'll just say that we do both of those things. We work with the school to get information, and we work with the school to give them back information and to give other schools information that we've gotten from the schools we're working with, so that those schools can immediately be the beneficiaries of what we're learning. All right, let's see. You guys are funny. You have a good sense of humor out here. So yes, I see Alva is asking about, so STEM may be moving toward a continuum. I mean, I think we would say that every instructional practice is on a continuum, that we as educators tend to make assumptions about what other people mean. I mentioned inquiry earlier. This is a long, 100-year, longer used term, hundreds of years used term. And it has an enormous range of definitions and meanings. So, like inquiry, like other problem-based learning, all trends, I guess I could say, and even interventions are on a continuum. and where we've failed to understand their effectiveness is by leaving our understanding of them at a very general understanding and not digging down just one more level deeper so we can be clear when we're talking to one another about them.
Hello, Jeanne. Gary again. Sorry to dominate here. Do you notice any team teaching taking place? Yeah.
Team teaching, you said? Yeah. Well, in fact, one of the things that we have seen quite a bit, very common, in the STEM schools is, well, team teaching is very common, right? It's a very common thing that people talk about. In the case of these schools, they might refer to it as interdisciplinary because they're focusing a lot, in many cases, on integrating disciplines. This can be, for some people who are disciplinary purists, I guess I'll say, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way. You know, it raises red flags for them because there's fear that the disciplines might be lost. But they do spend a lot of time in interdisciplinary teams and planning teams, and that's also part of what enables them to have the flexibility that I talked about earlier. All right, we need to wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining me. This has been really terrific. And do feel free to get in touch with me or to get in touch with Melanie. And if you're interested in computer science education, join me and my colleagues right now in just a couple minutes in our session on our computer science education work. So thank you all so much, and I hope to hear from you.
Thanks, Jeanne.